All right, folks, welcome aboard. It's hour number 3, and it's a Friday, which means it's the final hour of this week's Steve Malzberg show. In just a few moments, Jay Sekulow, Chief Counsel of the American Center for Law and Justice, will join us. He has a great new book, Rise of ISIS, A Threat We Cannot Ignore. CNN's reporting right now new developments that ISIS forces have seized 60 more villages. But, you know, we're still plotting a strategy. It's okay. So we'll talk to Jay about that. Now, earlier in the show, we carried for you live Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL's press conference. He gave a rather lengthy opening statement where he said that he made a mistake. He got it wrong on Ray Rice, but now he's going to get it right. He's going to institute new changes to the personal conduct policy for not only the players and staff and administration, but also for the owners. And that he hopes to have in place by the Super Bowl time in February at the end of the NFL season. He also said that it'll be a clear and transparent change, and the rules will be clear and transparent. He also did express concern for due process, and someone accused of something has to be given due process. He said that every club now will have training programs and advocacy groups in their own cities that they'll meet with. Domestic violence, sexual abuse he talked about, also irresponsible use of guns, alcohol abuse. He said none of that has any place in the NFL. I personally don't see how guns, if you have a license for a gun, if you have a legal right to a gun, then how does that enter into with excessive drinking, and which could be illegal if you're driving, or domestic violence or anything else illegal? But that was the press conference, to be continued. Right now, we're going to go to Jay Sekulow, but first, let's all watch and listen to this.
And I've been asking this question legitimately of friends and others who are experts. I think the last time we can record a non-state army like this moving through that area was 1220 AD with Genghis Khan.
Wow. Wow.
We've not seen anything like this in our lifetime. I'm almost 60, and in the entire 20th century.
All right, folks, that's very serious stuff, and that was earlier in the week. And joining us now is the Chief Counsel of the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow. And welcome, Jay.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure, and congratulations, because your book, Rise of ISIS, A Threat We Can't Ignore, is nothing short of fantastic, and is something that everybody really needs to read to realize just what we are facing. What made you, you're a very busy man, you're doing a lot of important things, and what made you take the time to do this important
Well, we've
work?
got an office in Jerusalem, so we're always following terrorist organization, terrorist threats, and I've actually represented the interests of Israel before the International Criminal Court in The Hague. So we've been following these issues for a long time, and actually this summer I was at Oxford participating at a program at Exeter College. I'm a fellow at another college of Oxford, and the topic of ISIS came up, and that's what I did. My presentations were on ISIS and Hamas, and by the time that presentation and the program completed, which was the end of July, of course, ISIS was then the national news story because of the beheading of the journalists. And we had at that point the definitive papers. We converted those into a book. Simon & Schuster, our publisher with Howard Books imprint, went to work immediately, and we were able to launch earlier this week the e-version of our book, Rise of ISIS, A Threat We Can't Ignore. And the paperback actually is coming out October 14th, but I've been doing a lot of interviews, and I'm thrilled to be with you, but this is a book that tells you who ISIS is, what their agenda is, where they came from, what their lethality capabilities are, and how we eliminate it, contrary to what the president's saying. And thousands and thousands have bought the Kindle version or the Nook or the Apple iReader, the ebook. In fact, the cutoff period for the New York Times bestsellers list is really tomorrow, Saturday evening at midnight. So we're pushing people, if those that want to buy it, to buy the ebook version, and then, of course, those that want to buy the paperback as well. But it's been a great success so far, Steve. But the idea here is this is an intergenerational conflict. This is not a war where there's going to be a beginning and an end. I mean, we're going to have to be doing this for a long time. And this idea that we're not in a war of terror and the president says we're not fighting Islam, well, tell that to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Caliph Ibrahim as he calls himself. Tell him we're not in a war with Islam, because I don't think him or his 33,000 soldiers would take the same position.
Right. Well, Jay, first of all, there's so much I want to get to, but just on that statement alone, if you take the president's statement and his logic that no religion would condone the killing of innocents, then by definition, Al-Qaeda and all the rest of them, and there's a laundry list, none of them are Islamic. And, of course, that's nonsense.
Well, let me take it a step further. Secretary Kerry, he's doubling down on this. He said, when it was asked in his hearing yesterday whether this was a war, he said, well, I care about making sure we defeat ISIL, and if you're more comfortable calling it a war against this enemy of Islam, not a war against Islam,
right,
but a war against this enemy of Islam. In other words, ISIS is the enemy of Islam. Hey, breaking news alert. ISIS is Islam. It's a version, a branch. It's not one, obviously, that some Muslims are not happy with, but it is unfortunately is a branch and growing branch of this radical jihad. Is a growing branch of Islam. We could put our heads in the sand and ignore it, but this is not a war against the enemies of Islam. This is an Islamic war brought to us.
And you mentioned Hamas and ISIS in the same breath a little earlier, talking about what you were speaking about in Jerusalem. And of course, I've maintained, and I'm sure you'll agree, that if, God forbid, of course, Hamas could go into Israel and successfully enter, they would chop off the heads of every Jew if only they could. They're the same.
Well, of course. I mean, look, they assassinated they murdered 3 teenagers, shot them in the head. So these are the same groups. By the way, this is something that's important. I think people need to have a visual map. So you've got ISIS that has moved basically from east to west. So they're in Iraq and Syria, and they're moving towards Jordan, Lebanon. They call themselves ISIL. That included the Levant, which is the greater Middle East, which includes Israel. Then you got Hamas coming in from the west, Hezbollah coming down from the north. Hey, look, I mean, these are all the same groups, same agendas. If you look at the combined total army of ISIS and Hamas, you're looking at 60,000 troops. And they're not hiding in caves like Al-Qaeda. They are an army. They're a force. And they've got more territory than many nation states. So we put all this out in the book, Rise of ISIS, a threat we can't ignore, for precisely this reason.
Well, tell us, because a lot of people became aware of ISIS, as apparently our president, although he claims to have just become aware of them, although he had to have known for years, with the beheadings of the journalists.
Right.
And, of course, it goes way, way, way back.
Well, it does. So ISIS itself, and this is the fascinating part, did not just come out of nowhere. They've never been the JV team, as President Obama called them in January. The fact of the matter is, and this is the reality of what we've got here, when you look at where they came from, they were Al-Qaeda in Iraq, AQI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They were so violent in their approach that Osama bin Laden and his lieutenants kicked Ibrahim, the Caliph Ibrahim as he now calls himself, which is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, they kicked him out of Al-Qaeda. And that's when he formed initially ISIS, then he called it ISIL, and now he just calls it the Islamic State.
Yeah, and the Congress, Jay, has been holding hearings on ISIS and the threat of ISIS for years. The security committees and the committees who deal with such a thing, they've known about it. How on earth is it that we have done nothing? And let me rephrase it a little bit. How has the president's lack of actions contributed to the ISIS that we now face today?
Well, first of all, if we would have had a status of force agreement in Iraq, none of this would have happened.
Right.
It would not have been able to grow. So that was a really big mistake. Number 2, not getting on top of this sooner was also a huge mistake. And then number 3, funding the Syrian moderate rebels. I'd like someone to tell me who they are exactly. But I'd like the Syrian moderate rebel leader to come forward and tell me who he is. I'd like to meet him. Or meet the team, because I don't buy it. I think what we're going to end up is giving them U.S. weapons that, just like ISIS, is using against, right now, the Peshmerga and the few Iraqi forces that are fighting. They will use them against our own allies as well.
Not only that, I mean, they have dual loyalty. First of all, they're terrorists. A lot of them are terrorists. They're Al-Qaeda, they're other terrorists. They would just as soon chop off the American head who hands them the weapon. But also, they want to get Assad out. So why do we think they're going to go after ISIS when their main goal is to get rid of Assad?
Well, that's exactly correct. So they're not. They're going to enter into these non-aggression pacts, which they've already have some of these truces already in place. They're going to take the weapons. They're going to go after Assad, and Assad, as bad as he is, ISIS is worse. And that's what the reality of what we have to deal with. So This is, none of these enemies are great. They're all horrible. Like you said, someone asked me yesterday, well, are we better off with the Sunni or the Shia? That's not it's not a better Sunni or a better Shia.
Right.
They've been fighting with each other since the founding of Islam, yes, but there's not a better side to this.
I want you to hear real quick what Bill Clinton said earlier today. This is 41, talking about a ground war. Here it is. Okay, we don't have it. He said basically that we can't win a ground war. He said the Iraqis can. Why would he say something like that?
I have no idea, because I don't, look, I know American military has been stretched. We're the strongest military in the world. Does anybody out there believe that the United States, with the ground war and air campaigns, could not beat ISIS? Does anybody believe if you let the soldiers do their job? I don't believe that. I know we can. But look, hopefully you don't have to get to that point. But to take it off the table, to signal in the beginning,
right,
we're not going to do this. Telling your enemy what your strategy is absurd.
Well, that's what he does, and now we see that there's a lot of tension between him and the military, which has really always existed. There's a lot of disagreement about strategy. This apparently is the president's strategy. The military wants at least the option of ground forces, and they're ticked off that he is taking it off the table. Jay, great book, folks. It's an ebook. Go find it. It's called Rise of ISIS, A Threat We Can't Ignore by Jay Sekulow. Great talking to you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
All right, my pleasure. All right, folks. We can't win a ground war. Yeah, that's pretty good. You heard that before. I wanted Jay to hear it, but he's aware of it. And what would possess Bill Clinton to believe that? Now, I'm sure he'll clarify it when asked about it the next time, and he'll say, well, that's not what I meant. Well, it's what he said. It's actually exactly what he said. We'll talk about it coming up next, that and more, with the Malzberg panel, if you stay where you are, right here on Newsmax Television.